Every time you pull that small plastic rectangle from your pocket to pay for a meal, a flight, or a tank of gas, you are participating in a financial revolution that started with a forgotten wallet. Frank McNamara was not a global banker or a Wall Street titan, but a moderately successful businessman who fundamentally altered the mechanics of consumer trust. Before 1950, the standardized universal credit card we know today did not exist. If you wanted to borrow money for daily expenses, you relied on localized merchant accounts or cumbersome bank loans. How did one man's embarrassing moment at a New York restaurant create an industry that now moves trillions of dollars annually? Frank McNamara was born in 1917 into a world where cash was the undisputed king of commerce. The global economy ran on physical currency, and consumer credit was heavily fragmented and rigidly localized. Department stores occasionally issued metal charge plates to their wealthiest patrons, but these were only valid within those specific stores. There was no universal system that allowed a customer to dine, shop, and travel using a single line of trust. Each merchant kept its own private records, and a person's reputation for paying debts simply did not travel with them from one storefront to the next. Credit was a web of isolated relationships, never a single connected network. By the late 1940s, McNamara was running a modest financial company in New York called the Hamilton Credit Corporation. His business involved purchasing installment contracts from small merchants, essentially providing them with immediate cash while taking on the risk of collecting from the consumers. This gave him a deep, practical understanding of how everyday people manage their debts and how merchants struggled with cash flow. McNamara saw firsthand the friction in a system where trust was geographically limited to a single storefront. He watched merchants lose sales simply because they had no reliable way to extend credit to a stranger, and he watched customers fumble for cash they did not always carry. The legend of the modern credit card centers on a crisp evening in the autumn of 1949. McNamara was dining at Major's Cabin Grill, a popular restaurant in Manhattan, alongside his lawyer, Ralph Schneider. As the meal concluded and the waiter presented the bill, McNamara reached into his suit jacket and realized he had left his wallet in another suit at home. He faced the humiliating prospect of waiting while his wife drove into the city to settle his tab. While some historians debate the exact theatrical details of this dinner, the fundamental truth of the event sparked a revolutionary idea. McNamara recognized a glaring inefficiency in the post-war American economy. Businessmen were increasingly traveling and entertaining clients, yet they were forced to carry large, vulnerable sums of cash to cover unexpected expenses. He envisioned a system where a single trusted intermediary could vouch for a patron at multiple, unaffiliated establishments. The wallet he forgot that night would become the very thing he intended to make obsolete. Returning to his office, McNamara began sketching out the architecture of what he called the Diners Club. The premise was elegantly simple, but structurally unprecedented for the era. A middleman would issue a cardboard identification card to vetted individuals, promising restaurants that the club would guarantee the payment. In exchange, the club would charge the restaurant a fee for bringing in loyal, high-spending customers. The customer, meanwhile, would receive the convenience of paying a single, consolidated bill at the end of the month. McNamara pitched this idea to Ralph Schneider, and they agreed to invest initial capital to launch the venture in early 1950. They initially focused entirely on the bustling restaurant scene of New York City, targeting salesmen and executives who frequently entertained clients. The insight was that these were exactly the people who lived on expense accounts and hated carrying cash. If the concept could work anywhere, it would work among the traveling businessmen of Manhattan. The initial rollout of the Diners Club card was met with intense skepticism from both sides of the transaction. Restaurant owners were fiercely protective of their margins and balked at the idea of paying a 7% commission to a third party. They argued that paying a middleman for a customer who was already sitting in their dining room made little financial sense. On the other side, consumers were hesitant to adopt a new, unproven financial tool. To overcome this inertia, McNamara and Schneider had to carefully construct an illusion of exclusivity and necessity. They offered the first 200 cardboard rectangles to personal friends and business acquaintances, creating a small but active network of initial users. To convince the skeptical restaurant owners, Frank McNamara realized he had to prove that his card members spent more than cash customers. He meticulously tracked the dining habits of his initial 200 users. He demonstrated to proprietors that cardholders, unburdened by the cash in their pockets, ordered more expensive wine and extra courses. By the end of 1950, the Diners Club had grown to 20,000 members and expanded its network to include hotels and florists. The sheer volume of transactions required a robust administrative backend to process the daily influx of paper. This rapid growth forced McNamara to formalize the exact mechanical steps that would define the credit card industry for decades. When a patron finished their meal, the waiter presented a specialized paper charge slip bearing the Diners Club logo. The customer signed this physical receipt, authorizing the transaction and verifying their identity against the signature on their cardboard membership card. At the end of the business day, the restaurant bundled these signed paper slips and mailed them directly to the Diners Club headquarters. There was no telephone call, no instant approval, and no electronic record of any kind, only paper moving through the postal system. The accounting clerks at the club then manually entered each transaction into a massive central ledger book, organizing the debts by the customer's unique account number. This ledger was the beating heart of the entire operation, the single place where every scattered dinner became part of one connected account. Once the transactions were verified in the ledger, the club issued a direct check to the restaurant, subtracting their 7% commission. The merchant received guaranteed money without ever having to chase the customer, which was the precise value the club was selling. Finally, at the end of the month, the club compiled all individual charges and mailed a single, consolidated paper invoice to the customer. That monthly statement, arriving in a plain envelope, was the first time in history that an ordinary consumer's spending across many independent businesses had been gathered into one bill. This seemingly simple paper pipeline fundamentally shifted the risk of consumer default from the local merchant to a centralized financial institution. The Diners Club assumed the entire burden of chasing down late payments, liberating businesses from the awkward task of collecting debts from their regular patrons. For the first time, a centralized entity was underwriting the daily consumption habits of the American middle class. However, the physical and financial strain of managing this explosive growth began to take a toll on McNamara. He viewed the Diners Club as a clever, profitable fad rather than the foundation of a permanent, global financial infrastructure. In 1952, just 2 years after launching the company, he made a decision that would define his historical legacy. Believing the market for credit cards was already saturated, McNamara sold his entire stake in the Diners Club to his partners for roughly $200,000. He walked away from the enterprise just as the concept was beginning to fundamentally rewire global commerce. His partners, Ralph Schneider and Alfred Bloomingdale, immediately pushed the company into international markets. By the mid-1950s, the Diners Club was an international phenomenon, accepted in dozens of countries and boasting over 1 million members. The cardboard rectangles had become powerful status symbols, signaling that the bearer was a person of means and trust. The success of McNamara's creation inevitably attracted the attention of massive financial institutions. In 1958, the landscape shifted dramatically when the American Express Company launched its own charge card. They leveraged their vast international network of travel offices to instantly rival the Diners Club footprint. Shortly after, the Bank of America introduced the McNamara card, which eventually evolved into the Visa network we know today. These banking giants fundamentally altered McNamara's original architecture to maximize their own revenue. While the Diners Club required members to pay their balance in full every month, the new bank-issued cards introduced the concept of revolving credit. This meant consumers could carry a balance forward from month to month, paying a designated interest rate on the remaining debt. The financial product shifted from a simple convenience tool for traveling businessmen into an immensely profitable lending engine. What McNamara had designed as a matter of pure convenience, the banks re-engineered into a machine for generating perpetual interest. In 1959, American Express introduced the first card made of embossed plastic, replacing the fragile cardboard of the Diners Club. This physical evolution allowed merchants to use mechanical imprinting machines to capture card details quickly and accurately. The retail clerk placed the plastic card into the metal imprinter, overlaid a carbon copy paper slip, and slid a heavy roller across the top. The raised plastic numbers physically pressed the customer's account data directly onto the merchant's deposit slip. This carbon copy was then physically mailed to the issuing bank to initiate the transfer of funds. It was a slow, mechanical precursor to the instantaneous digital authorization networks we rely on today. Yet the underlying logic of a trusted middleman guaranteeing payment remained exactly the same. Frank McNamara never lived to witness the full, world-altering scale of this banking revolution. He passed away from a sudden heart attack in 1957 at the age of 40. At the time of his death, he was largely unaware that his cardboard dining club would eventually mutate into a multi-trillion-dollar global debt industry. The legacy he left behind is deeply complex and fundamentally shapes modern consumer behavior. The modern credit network still relies on the exact tripartite structure McNamara invented that night in New York. A centralized issuing bank acts as the intermediary, instantly paying the merchant while assuming the risk of consumer default. The merchant still pays a percentage fee for every transaction, a direct descendant of that original 7% Diners Club commission. The consumer still receives a consolidated monthly statement, though the paper ledger has been completely replaced by digital algorithms. The ultimate winners of this system were the massive financial networks that effectively privatized the infrastructure of global trust. They built an inescapable toll road for modern commerce, extracting billions in merchant fees and consumer interest payments. The losers are often the small merchants who are forced to absorb these swipe fees to remain competitive, and the consumers who fall into the trap of high-interest revolving debt. What began as a clever solution to a forgotten wallet became a mechanism for endless, frictionless consumption. Today, the physical plastic card is slowly vanishing into digital wallets on our phones, but the underlying power structure remains completely intact. Every tap or swipe still enriches the invisible intermediaries who vouch for our financial reliability. As physical cash continues to disappear, we must ask ourselves a critical question about this system. Do you believe the daily convenience of universal credit justifies the immense power and data we have surrendered to a handful of global financial intermediaries? Or has McNamara's simple idea grown into a burden that outweighs its convenience? If you want to continue uncovering the hidden historical blueprints of the systems that control our daily lives, subscribe to the channel.